Just want to say again, thank you for having us. We are in Bedford, New Hampshire. I do serve the entire state of New Hampshire. I've been working with people with memory impairment for now 19, 20 years. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and so when it's time for some Q&A for me, there's no silly question. Probably the silliest question that actually came to fruition is, do dolphins get Alzheimer's disease? And the answer is, there's evidence that they do. So it's pretty interesting. So no silly questions. So today what we're going to be going over is a condensed version of a program that we call Understanding Alzheimer's and Dementia. So this is going to provide you with an overview and some clarification, I think, on some information that you're probably curious about, maybe some information you've heard out there, and hopefully you're going to walk away tonight with, again, some clarification. And we've got this beautiful clicker. Most of the time, if I'm across the room, it just doesn't work. So these are our objectives for today. We're going to, again, look at the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's. There is an actual difference. We're going to look at how Alzheimer's disease affects the brain. We're going to talk about risk factors, so you know what leads eventually, what can increase the likelihood that we develop Alzheimer's. We'll go briefly over the three main stages of Alzheimer's disease, FDA-approved treatments, which I know that we were joking around a few minutes ago about how the economy seems like such a doomsday coming, right? Well, there's actually hope on the horizon for Alzheimer's, so in terms of treatment, so I'll touch on that, which is really, really exciting. And a little bit about research along with the FDA-approved treatments, and then just a couple minutes about us. But I'm happy to, there's lots of information, so trust and believe. If I don't necessarily get to that, there's lots of collateral material that you can take advantage of. So because we want to exercise those brains, there are actually a couple of test your knowledge questions, so put those hats on, folks, okay? And actually, here we go, I was gonna say, it's coming up. So test your knowledge. So let's talk about the impact of Alzheimer's disease. So take a look at this. Approximately how many people in the United States are currently living with Alzheimer's disease? So not every type of dementia, okay, because that would be a much bigger number. Alzheimer's disease specifically. Stick up a number one if you think it's over 3 million. Do we think it's 6 million?
6 million covers all three of the bottom, so I'll take 6.
Okay, so he says 6. How many people, raise your hand if you think it's 8 million people. Okay, how many people think it's 11 million people? Okay, so kind of a good mix there. So let's see. The answer is, that's right, so more than 6 million people. So let me put it in perspective for you. I've been with the association for 12 years. When I started with the association 12 years ago, it was 4.6 million nationwide. So that's a significant jump. 1 in 9 people over the age of 65 will develop Alzheimer's. You're close enough, about 12%. Yeah. So again, right now in the United States, we have 6 million people. Right here in the Granite State, we have 26,000 people living with Alzheimer's disease specifically. And that might not sound like a large number, but we are an aging state. And unfortunately, New Hampshire does not have the infrastructure to care for our aging population, especially those with chronic illness and special considerations, we'll call it. Yes, ma'am. No, I don't think that's the case. It's probably more like 10% of the people over the age of 65, which when we talk about risk factors, you'll understand what that means a little bit better. But luckily, that's not the case. So let's keep going because we've got a little bit more test your knowledge here. Okay, so how many Americans provide unpaid care for people with Alzheimer's disease or other dementias? So this is unpaid help. So this is probably many of you in this room, to be honest with you, friends, neighbors, family members, folks from your local faith community that are helping out other people that are unpaid. Do we think it's 8 million? Raise your hand. Anybody? Okay. Now I feel like the auctioneer. So can I take 11? No. So how many people think it's over 11 million unpaid caregivers? Okay. How about 14? Okay, 18. All right, let's see. So over 11 million people. Now, if we paid all of those unpaid caregivers, talk about a kick to the economy. Okay, so the other thing that I want to mention about this is if we think about the fact that there's 6 million people in the United States living with Alzheimer's, I've been around people with Alzheimer's and other dementias long enough to know that it takes more than 1.8 persons to care for someone with Alzheimer's or another dementia. Just like we've all heard the phrase, it takes a village to raise a child. I really do believe it takes a village to care for someone with memory impairment. And so I frankly think that number is very conservative because, less than 2 people on average to care for each person with memory impairment is just not adequate. That's to me is, like I said, very, very conservative. So let's switch gears and I'll let you take a break from your thinking caps for a moment. Just kidding, just long enough to switch slides. Okay, so one more, okay. So this one's easy, true or false? Is Alzheimer's disease a normal part of aging? It would say that on the slide if I advanced it, yeah. So true or false? Is it a normal part of aging? Raise your hand if you think it's true and inevitably we will all get Alzheimer's. That's what true means. False means not everybody will develop it. Oh, your hand should be up, yes, okay. All right, so luckily, okay. Alzheimer's disease is a progressive degenerative brain disease, but not everybody will get it. And certainly Alzheimer's disease, as well as any other type of dementia, impacts our thinking, our memory, and our overall functioning to the point where it starts to impact our day-to-day functioning. And that's the big differentiating point between normal aging and dementia. So we all have brain blips. I walk into a room and forget why I went there. I forget that one special ingredient I need for that baked dish I was going to make for the holidays. Have to go back to the store, that sort of thing. So, but on a regular basis, it's annoying in the moment, but does that impact my overall independence and day-to-day functioning? No. When those troubles and those changes in functioning start to impact a person's overall independence and functioning, that's the tipping point to when we should really be more concerned. And we actually encourage people to kind of run, not walk, to go see their healthcare practitioner to find out, is it some form of dementia or is it something else? Does someone have a new condition that is mimicking dementia but that can actually be treated? So that's really important to remember too. Now, true or false? Can people under the age of 65 get Alzheimer's? Oh, a lot of smarty pants in this room. Yes. So the answer is, and sorry, this is actually a repeat of the statement from the last slide, but absolutely, people under the age of 65 can develop Alzheimer's. We call that young onset Alzheimer's disease, and we are seeing more and more people in their 40s and 50s developing and being diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. Now you're probably wondering, well, Melissa, geez, is this like some new rampant thing? What is going on? I don't necessarily think it's that. I think it's that we're diagnosing people earlier and more accurately because we have new brain imaging, we've got new technology for biomarkers, we've got technology that can help us identify whether or not a person has Alzheimer's, and again, earlier than ever before. Until very recently, though, it was disappointing for me to have to say, again, up until recently, it was disappointing for me to have to say that despite folks getting diagnosed earlier and more accurately, we didn't have any more meaningful treatments, but that's since changed over the past couple years, and I'll touch on that in a little bit. So we're going to talk about risk factors. And by the way, we talked for a moment before about age. Just might giving you a big fat hint. Okay. So what is the greatest known risk factor? Age. Oh, in unison. I love it. Okay. So age. And guess what? We're all aging as soon as we're born, unfortunately, right? So despite the fact that not everybody will develop Alzheimer's disease, as they age, our risk does go up as we age. So over the age of 65, a person has a 1 in 9 chance of developing Alzheimer's disease. If someone is over the age of 85, they have about a 1 in 3 chance of developing Alzheimer's disease. You might not know me that well yet, but hopefully I'm indicating to you I'm a glass half full kind of girl, okay? So if you're over 65, you have an 8 in 9 chance of not developing the disease. And if you're over 85, God bless you, okay? I want to drink what you're drinking. And you have about a 2/3 chance of not developing the disease, okay? So the odds are still in our favor. We want to keep it that way. And so I think it's important to know that our risk goes up, but our risk for a lot of different chronic illnesses go up as we age as well. So there are, and this would be a whole nother presentation, but there are lifestyle modifications that we can make to reduce our risk of developing dementia. Lots of science and research going on right now that relates to sleep, reducing inflammation, reducing stress, nutrition, exercise. Some of those changes in your lifestyle are actually have actually been shown to reverse the damage from dementia and actually improve your cognition, and that's more than we've been able to say up until recently when it comes to pharmaceuticals. So, you know, there's a lot of great information and research going on right now in a lot of different ways. So one thing that I do want to touch on is the fact that people of color are disproportionately impacted by Alzheimer's disease, okay? Hispanic Americans are 1.5 times as likely to develop Alzheimer's disease. Black Americans are about twice as likely. And guess what, all the ladies in the room? We are disproportionately impacted by Alzheimer's disease in 2 different ways. In both ways, we develop the disease more, and we're also more often caregivers of others with Alzheimer's disease. Yes, ma'am.
Don't women generally live longer than that too?
We do, yes, absolutely. But we used to think that it was only because we lived longer. That is a major factor. However, there's some really interesting research going on right now to look at whether hormonal factors may also increase our risk, and whether other lifestyle choices that women make may also be contributing to it. So I think there's more to come. That research is on the newer side. But yeah, most of it is because we do live longer, but we don't live 10 years longer than men, right? We don't live so much longer than men that may, you know, it makes sense that there are probably other factors. Did you have a follow-up question?
In my situation, my husband has it, but his mother had it.
Sure.
His sister died with it. His sister died with it.
Sure.
And he presently has it.
Sure.
So are genetics involved as well?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There are 2 categories of genes related to Alzheimer's disease: deterministic genes and risk genes. So risk genes would indicate that someone has an increased risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. Deterministic genes would determine that a person is most likely going to develop the disease. Now I say that, however, the average American does not have access to genetic testing. Even if your doctor would write an order for it, your insurance company would not pay for it. So that's kind of the conundrum right now. If someone is in a clinical research study that is looking at genetics and genetic markers and things like that, they would have access to genetic testing, of course. Or if someone has a lot of the green stuff, which hopefully you all are saving and maybe you could spend some of your assets on, I don't know. But you know, it's very expensive, and some people don't even want to know, right? But I mean, if someone is actually actively seeking that, usually research studies or private pay. So there are genes related to it, but it would be really, like I said, the average American doesn't currently have access to that, which is too bad.
Really be beneficial for those with early onset, because then they could get the medication to slow the progression.
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And I think that insurance companies have come a long way in terms of what they're covering, but we still have a long, long way to go with a lot of things, right? So this is just a quick recap in the essence of time, because I know your yummy food is coming. This is just a review of what we just went through. So briefly, we're going to look at the stages of the disease. These are some quick embedded videos. These are people, you know, you're hearing sort of straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak. You're hearing from people who have had functional changes, who have been diagnosed with some form of dementia. I think it's a little bit different than me telling you about their experience and you actually hearing from them. So
I'm like an overachiever, and when you're unable to deliver or you're not performing at the same pace that you once did before, that's frustrating. It's frustrating to not know where you place things. It's frustrating to not be able to explain to someone the problems that you're having. You can't articulate it in a way. It's frustrating to read something and you forgot what you read. It's frustrating to continuously have to change your password and you just changed it last week and you're constantly doing the same thing over and over again.
Math, I can't do a simple tip anymore. You know, I sit there, I stare at it. It's crazy what numbers I can't deal with anymore. And in some ways, that's the disease to me. The other thing that I've increasingly been struggling with are words, which I've dealt with words my entire life. You know, as an avid reader, as a reporter, as a writer. I struggle with them now.
And you could almost see at the end in real time his struggle trying to word find and be able to articulate what he wanted to say.
I think the thing that surprises me the most about my dementia is that it is progressive, and I'm finding that I'm forgetting more, and they do memory tests for me all the time at the doctor, and so that becomes a little disconcerting at times, to see my cognitive impairment continue to decline. But again, I really have hope. I don't live really in the future. I can't live in the future. I can't worry about what the future is going to bring. I have to live for today.
Okay, so let's talk briefly about the stages of Alzheimer's disease. So this asymptomatic stage, this kind of teal-colored stage, the asymptomatic stage, that's where all of us are, okay? So technically you're in one of the first stages of Alzheimer's. Okay, no, I'm just kidding. So this is where the person is not having any symptoms. Now, when symptoms start to develop, but really aren't impacting a person's overall functioning day to day yet, they may be diagnosed with what we call mild cognitive impairment. Mild cognitive impairment means there's enough of a change that it's showing up on clinical exam, like on a cognitive test at the doctor's, but day to day, the person themselves or people close to them may not really recognize that there's much of a change. Now, I'm going to give you an analogy because I'm a fan of analogies. So mild cognitive impairment is to Alzheimer's as prediabetes is to diabetes. So we can all think of prediabetes as leading to, many times, to diabetes that increases your risk, right? So when someone is diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment, their risk of moving on and developing Alzheimer's disease goes up significantly, but it's not a guarantee. For instance, I work with someone up in Lebanon, in Lebanon, New Hampshire, in the Upper Valley, and she's had mild cognitive impairment for 11 years. She found out early. She started treatment. She started the treatments that were and still are available to help with her symptoms. She goes to a support group. She can't drive anymore, but her daughter lives locally. So she's been able to create supports for herself to help her maintain her functioning so that things aren't progressing, her symptoms aren't progressing any further than the mild cognitive impairment. So when we move into sort of a clinical diagnosis, an official diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease, they're sort of the early, middle, and late stage of the disease, or mild, moderate, and severe. At the beginning of the disease process, mild or early stage, someone is still very independent. They're probably still working, probably still driving, maybe living alone, probably still safe for them to be doing any or all of those things. They may be having some trouble with their short-term memory. They may need to be using like memory aids, Post-it notes, their planner, you know, all manner of things. They need to be relying on those things more, or relying on other people more. But again, still a lot of independence there. Now, when someone moves into the middle or the moderate stage of the disease, this is when a person most likely is what I like to call retiring from driving. Okay, nicer way of saying pull in the keys, right? So, so a person tends to have more If you think of a person with dementia as having behaviors like agitation or trying to wander, those things tend to happen in this middle stage, okay? If you think about a light bulb that is flickering in your basement, think of that as a person's brain in this stage of the disease. The connections are there sometimes and the connections are not there other times, just like a flickering light bulb, okay? Now, when a person advances into the severe stage of the disease, by this point the person is very, very compromised, most likely needs help in every area of care, bathing, toileting, dressing, medication management. If they're still living in a home, it's usually with quite a bit of support. They may be living in assisted living or nursing home care at this point. And a lot of people ask me, well, Melissa, how do people die with Alzheimer's disease? Why, people die from other things. So why is it that we hear sometimes that people die of Alzheimer's rather? And the reason for that is that Alzheimer's disease impacts our immune system. It weakens our immune system, weakens our organs, and makes us more susceptible to things like sepsis and pneumonia and other conditions that eventually end up being fatal. So it was actually the Alzheimer's disease was the impetus for the susceptibility to some of those other things, which unfortunately pneumonia and sepsis kills quite a number of people. What I also want to say, in case you're wondering this, is that there's no set time frame in which someone will be in the early, middle, or late stage. If you've met one person with Alzheimer's, you've met one person with Alzheimer's. It varies substantially, and it also depends on when in the disease process a person gets their diagnosis. Sometimes people don't get diagnosed until this middle stage, and then I hear from families, well, one day he was fine, and the next day the doctor said he had middle stage Alzheimer's. And that's really not the case. It's the person didn't get diagnosed until pretty far into the disease process. So it seems like a surprise, it seems like a sudden change, but it was just identified as sort of being halfway through the disease process. So let's talk, I keep referencing like, ooh, there's hope on the horizon. Ooh, Melissa, what does that mean? Well, let's find out. I'm not going to go through these through this sort of continuum in a lot of detail, except to say that Dr. Alois Alzheimer in Europe actually was the first one to find these the buildup of plaques, this sort of toxic gunk that builds up in the brain. He's the one that actually found that, and believe it or not, he actually found it in a person in her 40s. So we would identify that as a person with young onset Alzheimer's disease. So the first person to ever have been identified was actually a very young person. So he developed it. He didn't name it Alzheimer's disease at the time, of course. So look, it took 90 years for some kind of treatment to impact this disease at all to come to fruition, and that is Aricept. And Aricept is if you've ever heard someone say, oh, my mom or dad is on a memory medication, 9 times out of 10, it's gonna be Aricept. So Aricept has been around an incredibly long period of time. It's available in a generic. It's very inexpensive, widely available, okay? So as sort of time has moved on, there have been some other treatments. Now, when we say treatments, these treat the symptoms of the disease. So if you have a cold and you take Dimetap or Robitussin, right? That's not gonna make the cold go away. That's gonna help you feel better while you have your cold. So these treatments help with the symptoms of the disease, and for some people can help slow down the progression of the disease so that that person has more brain matter, better functioning for longer. Okay, so that's good, but that doesn't stop or really impact the disease itself. So switching gears a little bit, and now we're on to our third medication of this class, but in 2021 there was a brand new medication, the first of its kind, which was a disease-modifying treatment for Alzheimer's disease. Well, Melissa, what does disease-modifying mean? You just said there's some other treatments out there. Disease-modifying means that this treatment, Aduhelm and now Leqembi, which is one that's been in the news a lot lately because of FDA approval. These medications actually, it's an infusion medication and it actually dissolves those beta amyloid, plaques that build up in the brain and are one of the telltale signs of Alzheimer's disease. So what this actually does is it dissolves that beta amyloid plaque before it sticks to your brain cells. And the reason why that's good is because once it sticks to your brain cells, it atrophies and it kills those brain cells. And when we lose lots and lots of brain matter, that's why on the outside we're observing the person not being able to tie their shoe, not being able to drive, not be able to manage that checkbook anymore. Okay? Yes?
How did you spell or say the last one?
Leqembi.
Yeah.
Leqembi. So that one actually came out in January, and through an accelerated FDA approval process, and there was some controversy about the accelerated nature of that. But since then, their research study was so successful that they went back and actually got traditional FDA approval, which will mean that it will probably come to market, and it's more likely that insurance payers will cover it. Right now, the VA is the only entity that has come forward and will pay for these infusion medications. Did you have a question, though?
Yeah, I thought I heard somewhere that the plaques were, they couldn't tell if they were a result or a cause of the problem. I don't know if that's been addressed in the medication development. Again, it's just something I heard.
Well, either way you slice it, it's there. And actually, the beta amyloid is sort of a toxic version of an original version of itself. So we all have amyloid in our brain right now. And what happens with Alzheimer's disease is there's sort of a light switch, there's a trigger that causes that amyloid to get snipped up. You know how like when you have little snips of your haircut, in your neck and it's kind of uncomfortable? So I kind of visualize it like that, little snippets, right? So that amyloid turns into a toxic version of itself, and all those little clippings, just like our little hair clippings like to stick to everything, those little snippets are now toxic beta amyloid and stick to your brain cells or your neurons. And so when they stick, they interfere with your brain cells' ability to operate like it's supposed to. So they atrophy and they die, and over years and decades of atrophy, again, on the outside, we're gonna see that functional loss. Yeah, sure. So, again, I guess the point here is please go see your practitioner. If you or someone you know or love is experiencing symptoms, do not brush it off. If I had some lesion on my arm, I wouldn't say, oh, it's just because I'm 74. I'll wait, Heck no, I'm gonna run to the doctor and say, what is going on? And so when it comes to our mental health and our cognitive health, just because they're invisible, right, doesn't mean we should, pay any less attention to them. Because we're talking about quality of life. And my goal as a social worker is always to maximize functioning and independence and really maximize quality of life for as long as possible. And if we can achieve that, then, sort of goal met. At least for me on a day-to-day basis when I, go to sleep at night. So just briefly, you're all aware that we have an office in Bedford, New Hampshire that serves the entire state of New Hampshire. One other thing that I want to point out really quickly, and then I think maybe some food will be coming soon, is that the Alzheimer's Association does not charge for any of our programs or services. So that is such a blessing in an era where Alzheimer's disease costs so much money. It's the #1 most expensive disease process in the United States as of a few years ago. And so we don't have any referrals, no co-pays, nothing like that. So you can call us 24 hours a day. I like to joke with people on a Saturday at 2 a.m. I'm not gonna necessarily be the one picking up the phone, sorry about that. But you will get a colleague, a trained master's level clinician, and you will get, if your loved one at 2 o'clock in the morning is agitated, they've woken up and they can't go back to sleep and you're so frustrated and they're trying to leave the house and you don't know what to do, or if you work third shift or second shift and that's the time of the night when you could otherwise be getting some information and support and resources, that's when you call us. And you can call us and reach out to us, whether it's in our Bedford office or our toll-free helpline number. Like I said, nights, weekends, holidays, as little or as often as you need. So we do education like this. As was mentioned, I do trainings at the police academy. I do first responder trainings. So there's not an audience that we don't try to educate and share information about brain health and Alzheimer's and dementia. So just want to thank you for your attention. I know we're going to enjoy some yummy treats soon, but just want to thank you all for having us. We really appreciate it. And there's lots more information up here. And again, if you remember nothing else, please come up here and take some piece of information that has our toll-free 1-800 number on it, because again, that just supplements what your primary care physician, you can't call your primary care physician on a weekend or at night, and really you can't call them to get emotional support, right? Or to ask some of the questions that you may be still thinking about now. So I don't know if I have a few more, if I have a few minutes for Q&A while the food is coming. Do you want to do that? Kill a few minutes? Yes, sir. Early onset, young onset. So there isn't one definitive test. Okay, so that's actually a really good point. So when it comes to getting an accurate diagnosis, I always describe a diagnosis of Alzheimer's as like a puzzle. Okay, there's a lot of pieces you need to that puzzle. So you're not going to go into your primary care physician, which is most likely where the average person is going to start first. You're not going to go in and say, I'm having trouble with my memory, and they're going to do one thing like a blood test, and that's going to be definitive. They're going to look at a lot of different things. Okay, well, what's worrying you? How long have these things been happening? Let's do a urinalysis and some blood work to rule out other things like an infection, an electrolyte imbalance, a thyroid problem, a vitamin or nutrient deficiency, right? Those things can be reversed. So we want to know if it's that, right? So that primary care physician most likely is going to rule out some really common things and start to narrow that down. Now, once a primary care physician can absolutely order an MRI or a PET scan or some of these more I don't want to say invasive tests, but more significant tests and brain imaging. A lot of times, if they don't, then you could certainly go see a neurologist, for instance, who specializes in the brain and the spinal cord. A lot of times, in addition to sort of a person going to see their primary and ruling out some of those other things, brain imaging is incredibly helpful. Sometimes people have a spinal tap if they can't go through an MRI for whatever reason. Cognitive testing, for sure. And so, again, if someone has access to enough of those sort of puzzle pieces, then, and I haven't said this for a very long time, I no longer say that you have to be dead to know that you have an accurate diagnosis of Alzheimer's. That's just not the case anymore. Because if you can get some of these, a variety of forms of testing, you can be 3 to 5%. There's only a 3 to 5% likelihood that you're incorrect about that diagnosis. There's a high likelihood that it's accurate, let's put it that way. There's unfortunately, we don't yet have one sort of definitive test. But the other thing that I want to let folks know about is that there is a lot of research going on to look at finding an inexpensive, non-invasive test to find out if you are at an increased risk. Because what do all of us in this room do? Every year for our physical, we get our lipid panel, we get our cholesterol checked, our blood pressure. Why do we get that? Because if those are high, or those are, your A1C, your sugars are off, that's going to indicate a much higher risk of developing some of these other issues. Well, what if we had an eye exam that could show that there is something happening in the eye that indicates an increased risk of Alzheimer's? Well, we could start some of these treatments, especially these disease-modifying treatments, way earlier in the process. And research has shown, and just the information that we have available, is that if we can help people get diagnosed 3 to 5 years earlier than they are now, that means that they're going to live longer with better quality of life, and we're going to save our healthcare system a whole lot of money, because they won't be as dependent on the healthcare system as they would be right now. So there's just a lot of science. We're in kind of what we think of as sort of like this golden age of Alzheimer's research. So we have hope. We have some new treatments that are available. Those have gotten FDA approval, but now we're just really nudging the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid and private payer sources to cover those things, because every single day that we wait, or insurers wait to cover those infusion medications, 2,000 more people every day move into the middle stage of the disease where they would no longer qualify to even receive that medication. 2,000 people every single day. Yes?
Well, I actually have two questions. The
Sure.
first one is, you said that if they can get diagnosed earlier, you can do some disease
Yeah.
modification protocol. Is that just pharmaceutical, or does that also include, like, say, exercise, maybe diet?
Oh, right there. Right, absolutely. You don't even have to have, I mean, we have a whole program just on the average person, an undiagnosed person, how we can change our lifestyle to reduce the likelihood of dementia. So there are plenty of research studies that do look at those factors based on someone who does have a diagnosis, but we actually want to educate people so that we know before symptoms even present themselves, right, what we can do. And the four major things, actually 5 things now, are diet and nutrition. And actually I include hydration with that, because hydration is incredibly important. Movement or exercise, social stimulation, exercising our brain, so cognitive exercise, and sleep. There's been a lot of research about sleep. Obviously, our brain doesn't go to sleep at night. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here listening and watching me right now. You would be somewhere else. And but it gives our body that time to recover and recuperate from the stress and the strain that we put it through every single day. So there's a lot of research that has been going on about preventative ways to reduce our risk. And second question number.
You said something about these Alzheimer's and dementia can be different. Did you?
Yes, I'm sorry, yes. So dementia in of itself is what we call an umbrella term. So think of, again, an analogy. If you go into the hospital and the doctor in the ER says, you have a fever. Well, fever isn't a diagnosis. A fever is a symptom. Think of the term dementia as a group of overall symptoms that relate to damage happening in the brain, but what's causing that damage happening in the brain? Is it from Alzheimer's? Is it from those plaques and tangles? Is it from a stroke, meaning a vascular dementia, which is a lack of oxygenated blood flow to the brain? Is it, I think one of the gentlemen who had one of those little embedded videos, he was, I think he either had frontotemporal dementia or Lewy body dementia. Lewy body dementia is what Robin Williams died of 7 or 8 years ago. Frontotemporal dementia, actually a subcategory of that is what it's Bruce Willis. Bruce Willis has. He has aphasia. He's having problems with his communication. So doesn't necessarily mean he has cognitive dementia symptoms, but some of those frontotemporal types of dementia have those communication problems associated with it predominantly. So those are great questions. So the food is here. I don't want to stampede folks, okay? But thank you for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions later.